I want to talk a little bit about how web pages are rendered on the screen, how they're shown on the screen. But I want to back up first and talk about files, just to give you a little bit of background. Everything in computers is in a file. Files were invented as containers, as wrappers, so that all the information, all the data, all the code, everything that we have on computers can be in somewhere. And of course, the idea of a file just goes right back to the idea of a paper file. Why did we invent paper files? To keep things organized, as little containers that we could put all of our information in inside of file cabinets. And a computer file works exactly the same way. It's a standardized wrapper, a standardized container into which you can put whatever you want. All computer programs agree on the basic idea of the wrapper. How to open that wrapper, how to see what's inside, how to close it, how to store it, how to put it in a folder, all those different things that are common to all the files on your computer. That's what's standard about files. Then what's inside the file is not standard at all. What's inside the file is really determined by the program that's reading and writing the file. A word processing program, for example, creates its own format inside the file. A spreadsheet program creates a different format inside the file. So files are the basic units of containing, or the basic units of wrapping in computer storage systems. They're the long-term storage areas for files. I want to point briefly to another term that is often used interchangeably with file, but really has no real good definition, and that's the idea of a document. Documents sometimes are thought of as word processing files, but not always. For example, document management systems manage all sorts of files, not just word processing files. So I'm going to stay away from that word document and instead use files. Okay, so why talk about files? The reason I need to talk about files is because HTML is inside a file. A web page really is nothing more than a plain text file, which plain text means that it can be read by lots and lots of programs, and it's in a semi-standard format for just representing text characters. It's in a plain text format. It can be read by many different programs, including like WordPad on the PC or in Windows. And it's a file that contains HTML tagging. So when we think of web pages, I want you to think of files. And later on, we're going to do a lot to create those files that contain the HTML that represents a web page. So an HTML web page is simply a file that contains HTML code. Browsers are programs. A browser is really a lot like a word processing program in the sense that it recognizes that particular file format, the HTML file format, and it can read that format. It can read the HTML tags and decide what to do with those HTML tags. Way back in the beginning, what it did with those HTML tags was actually hard-coded into the program. So when you rendered a P tag, it always rendered the same way, no matter what you tried to do to make it look different. It was always a P tag, and it always looked exactly like a P tag. These days, we have CSS, and CSS, the point of CSS really is to make that formatting malleable, to be able to load different kinds of formatting under different circumstances and have a paragraph be whatever you want it to be. You can make a paragraph look like a heading if you want it to. So a browser is a program that knows how to read HTML files and knows how to display them on the screen. Modern browsers have a lot of variability in that display. Older browsers did it in one set way. HTML or browsers and HTML were originally conceived as being platform independent. That meant that no matter where you rendered the page, it would always look the same. The same HTML file would look the same whether you rendered it on a Unix machine or a Windows machine or a Macintosh machine or any other kind of machine. In addition, it would look the same whether you rendered it in a Microsoft browser or a Firefox browser or a Safari browser, et cetera, et cetera. That was the idea, and in fact that was a really strong idea and one of the reasons HTML was invented in the first place, to create platform independence. So no matter where you looked at a file, no matter what your operating system, no matter what your browser program, it always looked the same. Well, I think you know very well, as everybody else knows, that it didn't really work out that way. We're still stuck in the same situation we were before we came up with HTML, which is it depends on where you look at it as to how it's actually going to look. So we haven't really gotten that platform independence. Okay, files and browsers. HTML is simply a file, HTML is a file format. HTML or web pages are HTML code inside of plain text files. Browsers are the programs that know how to read those files and display them on the screen.